Giordano Bruno, the cosmic rebel. Imagine the 16th century, a time when thinking outside the box might literally get you burned. Enter Giordano Bruno, a former Dominican friar turned cosmic visionary. Born in 1548 in Nola, Italy, Bruno had a knack for stirring the pot. He ditched his monastic vows after dabbling in forbidden books and questioning just about everything the church held sacred. Bruno was a man ahead of his time, centuries ahead to be exact. He championed the idea of an infinite universe, teeming with countless worlds and possibly life beyond Earth. For a church that still placed Earth at the cosmic center, this was like suggesting gravity was optional. Bruno's ideas weren't just scientific, they were spiritual. He believed God was present in every atom of the universe, making divinity not a distant ruler, but an intimate force. His tongue, as sharp as his mind, didn't help. Bruno debated scholars and priests alike, often leaving them fuming. After years of wandering Europe, dodging accusations of heresy, he fell into the hands of the Roman Inquisition. His trial lasted 7 years, a drawn-out tug-of-war over his soul and ideas. In 1600, he was burned at the stake, unrepentant to the end. Today, Bruno is a symbol of free thought and the eternal human quest to understand the cosmos. Marcion of Sinope, the God controversialist. Marcion of Sinope, a 2nd century theologian from what is now Turkey, was the original rebel of early Christianity. Picture him as the guy who shows up at a party and says, "You know what? I don't think the host is that great." Except the host here was the Old Testament God, and Marcion wasn't pulling any punches. Marcion's big idea? The God of the Old Testament, whom he called the Demiurge, was a cranky, vindictive tyrant, while the God of the New Testament was all about love and forgiveness. According to Marcion, Jesus came not to fulfill Old Testament prophecies, but to rescue humanity from this flawed creator. He even created his own pared-down version of the Bible, featuring an edited Gospel of Luke and 10 of Paul's letters. No fire and brimstone Yahweh allowed. His theology struck a chord, gaining him a considerable following, but the church, not a fan. Marcion was excommunicated in 144 CE. His works declared heretical, yet his ideas forced the early church to define its doctrine more rigorously, including which books belonged in the Bible. Today, Marcion is remembered as a provocateur, whose radical take on God questioned the boundaries of divine mercy and judgment. Not bad for a guy who got banned from the biggest club in town, Hypatia of Alexandria, the philosopher martyr. Born around 360 CE in the bustling intellectual hub of Alexandria, Hypatia was a polymath who would have aced every subject in school. She mastered mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, dazzling students with her insights and charisma. Oh, and she wasn't just any teacher. She ran the famed Neoplatonist school of Alexandria. Think of her as a 4th century rock star of reason. Hypatia's philosophy? A blend of Neoplatonism and scientific curiosity. She saw the universe as an orderly system where human reason was a key to unlocking cosmic truths. A devoted teacher, she attracted students of all faiths, including many Christians. But therein lay the problem. In a city boiling with religious tension, her pagan affiliations painted a target on her back. Her downfall came when she was falsely accused of sorcery and blamed for political conflicts between Christian factions. In 415 CE, a Christian mob, incited by a local bishop, dragged her from her chariot, brutally murdered her, and burned her body. Hypatia's death marked the end of Alexandria's golden age of intellectual inquiry. Today, she's a symbol of free thought and the tragic cost of ignorance. In short, she was killed for being too brilliant in a world too small for her genius. Jacob Boehme, the shoemaker mystic. Jacob Boehme wasn't the kind of guy you'd peg as a heretic, just a 17th century German shoemaker with a knack for deep thinking. Born in 1575 in Görlitz, Boehme's life was humble until one day. While gazing at sunlight reflecting on a pewter dish, he had an epiphany about the nature of God and the universe. Not your typical cobbler moment. Boehme's mystical visions led him to write extensively about the interplay between light and darkness, good and evil. He saw creation as a dynamic, eternal struggle, with God as the ultimate unity from which all dualities emerge. His most famous work, Aurora, was an explosion of cosmic theology and poetic philosophy. It was also a theological Molotov cocktail. The local Lutheran clergy were not amused. They accused Boehm of heresy, banned him from publishing, and tried to shut him up. But Boehm couldn't stop. He kept writing, producing works that inspired mystics, philosophers, and even artists for centuries. He died in 1624, unrecognized in his time, but later hailed as a mystic genius. Boehm remains a reminder that even a shoemaker can stitch together a vision of the universe that shakes the foundations of orthodoxy. John of Parma, the apocalyptic optimist. John of Parma was a 13th century Franciscan monk with a knack for stirring hope and a bit of trouble. Born in 1209, he became the 7th Minister General of the Franciscan Order, tasked with leading a growing movement of friars. But John wasn't content with just running the show. He was deeply inspired by the mystical and apocalyptic visions of Joachim of Fiore. Joachim had prophesied a new Age of the Spirit, where humanity would live in perfect harmony. John took this idea and ran with it, championing a return to the original, humble ideals of St. Francis. His leadership inspired many, but his lean toward apocalyptic theology didn't sit well with everyone. The Church, always wary of anything that smelled like heresy, found John's ideas a bit too radical. He was forced to resign in 1257 and was later accused of sympathizing with the controversial Spiritual Franciscans, a group that pushed Joachim's teachings even further. Despite his fall from grace, John lived to a ripe old age, spending his final years in prayer and reflection. Today, he's remembered as a visionary leader who dared to dream of a world transformed by divine love, a bit too boldly for the establishment's liking. Marguerite Porete, the radical mystic. Marguerite Porete was a 13th century French mystic whose audacity lay in writing a book so bold it got her killed. Born around 1250, Marguerite wasn't a nun, priest, or theologian. She was a Beguine, a member of a women's spiritual movement that valued personal mysticism over rigid church hierarchy. Her masterpiece, The Mirror of Simple Souls, explored a love so profound it led to the annihilation of the self, where the soul merged entirely with God. This union, she claimed, rendered one beyond the need for church laws or sacraments. Cue alarm bells at the Vatican. Marguerite's teachings might have been poetic and beautiful, but the Church labeled them dangerous. A soul that doesn't need us? Preposterous. Excommunicated and arrested, she refused to recant her ideas, insisting her visions came from divine inspiration. In 1310, after a long trial, Marguerite was burned at the stake in Paris. Her book was also condemned, though it survived and later inspired mystics like Meister Eckhart. Today, Marguerite is remembered as a spiritual pioneer who dared to claim direct access to the divine, a notion so heretical it ignited literal flames. Pelagius, the free will advocate. Pelagius, a British monk from the late 4th century, was the guy who stood up and said, "Hey, maybe we're not all born doomed." At a time when St. Augustine was hammering home the doctrine of original sin, Pelagius had a more optimistic take. He believed humans were born with free will and the ability to choose good or evil without divine intervention. This made Pelagius popular among those tired of guilt-laden sermons. His philosophy, called Pelagianism, emphasized personal responsibility and the idea that salvation wasn't a handout, but something earned through good deeds and discipline. To Augustine, this sounded like spiritual anarchy. The Church declared Pelagianism heretical, branding Pelagius as a dangerous thinker, undermining the necessity of grace. He was excommunicated, and his ideas were squashed, officially at least. Unofficially, his teachings lingered in whispers and debates. Pelagius's legacy? He's the eternal underdog, the saint of self-reliance, and a thorn in the side of theological determinism. Though labeled a heretic, his vision of human potential resonates with anyone who's ever thought, maybe I can change my fate after all. Meister Eckhart, the mystic who saw God everywhere. Meister Eckhart, a 14th century Dominican friar and theologian, was the kind of thinker who made people squirm and think. Born around 1260 in what's now Germany, Eckhart spent his life exploring the divine in ways that were both profound and provocative. His sermons and writings brimmed with mystical insights, poetic imagery, and ideas so daring they landed him in hot water with the church. Eckhart's big idea? The divine spark within each of us. He believed God wasn't some distant figure in the clouds, but an intimate force, dwelling in every soul. He preached that union with God could be achieved not through rituals or intermediaries, but by transcending the ego and embracing the divine essence within. The soul must lose itself, he taught, to find God. Radical stuff for medieval Europe. The church naturally was suspicious. Eckhart's teachings blurred the lines between God and humanity, sounding dangerously close to pantheism. After his death in 1328, some of his propositions were condemned as heretical. Today, Meister Eckhart is celebrated as a spiritual genius whose ideas resonate across religious and philosophical boundaries. His message? God isn't out there somewhere. God is here now, within. Heretical? Perhaps. Timeless? Definitely. Just like the videos on this channel. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe already.